we always say, oh, it's worked in the past, so let's keep going with it. We're we're sort of leaving ourselves behind when I think the world around us is progressively moving towards an automation engineering system design thinking, that kind of approach, right? The other piece of it really is translating our requirements into engineer speak. And this is where I think it's so invaluable to have that engineering experience, right? Will an auditor accept this evidence that you've
Mm.
generated with your integrations? And you're like, well, I've done the work.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the GRC Engineering podcast. I'm very excited with the guest I have with me today, Akshay, to kind of present who Akshay is. He currently works at Zoom, and he's the team lead in security and compliance engineering, and has been working in the security field for almost a decade. During his experience in security, he worked in GRC, but also as a DevSecOps engineer. So has kind of a blend of a technical background and also GRC experience, which also explains his current role. Akshay, very glad to have you with me today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. This is exciting.
Amazing, amazing. So the first question I wanted to ask you, of course, you work currently in GRC engineering, so you have literally the perfect resume for this. So what I wanted to ask you first is like learn more about your journey in GRC, how it fit into your security career, and kind of the role it played throughout your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started, well, I my core competency is computer engineering, which involved a lot of hardware stuff. And then my focus there was in cybersecurity. So that's kind of how I got started into the security world. And then as every GRC professional, most GRC professionals, I shouldn't say every, you start in consulting, right? It's a lot of people started in Big Four, a lot of people start in consulting. That's how I got started. Worked for a smaller firm that did, security, in compliance evaluations for healthcare in general. And as part of that, I got to scratch a little bit of my engineering itch by doing some pen testing on the side as well for them, and doing other evaluations. So um, that's how I got started in the space. And as most GRC professionals that have moved out of consulting, I got very disillusioned by being on a plane and staying in hotels and not paying rent for an apartment that I don't live in. So now I decided to move into more of the industry standards. So yeah, I started moved on from that consulting role then to a more engineering role, doing DevOps work and then DevSecOps. I put that in air quotes, and then security engineering. And now I'm here in GRC engineering.
So you kind of had like, as you said, kind of typical journey, right? Like consulting, like big consulting companies, and then kind of we say in French, like you move in-house, right? And then you kind of
Yeah.
move to the industry and kind of work straight from the other experience. What are the kind of major changes you've seen from like what is the big shift in mindset from working in consulting to working in industry?
Oh gosh. You have to go and fix the problems you find. That's the first one. It's nice to get a report and, say that, hey, you've got these many problems, you're not complying to, whatever regulation there is, and you can leave. You dust your hands off and leave. Here, if you find that out in industry, you just got to fix it and handhold all the way to remediation. That's one. And the second thing is, you really have to change your mindset in terms of short term versus long term. For
Mm.
me personally, I had to, I don't have much context switching, thankfully, too. That's another positive, but I had to change from thinking about, okay, this minor project, that's it. Now I want to focus on the larger picture and how I help the business. So that's been the biggest change for me personally. But thankfully, I've had a lot of great mentors that have done this shift before, and
Yeah.
they've helped me sort of walk that line. So
Yeah, that's that often very challenging. I think like sometimes in consulting, like you don't see a project end to end. So you're there for some of it, often you're here for a specific purpose in the project, and you want to learn like how it ends up being, or like could you get it to through fruition and to completion. And I think it's a difficult shift sometimes when you don't really get trained on like, now like it's not over. It's over when, we go through everything and like
Yeah,
and I,
and as part of that, there's the nuances of the business, right? You have to
yes.
understand, turning this on is going to break a whole bunch of other things in our product. So,
Yeah.
blindly doing sys benchmark checks and, going in and, turning things on and off is going to cause problems. Take it from someone who's brought down production before, to not do that. So,
Yeah, you're right. I think you lack sometimes context, because you have like, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But when you're
exactly.
in-house, you know everything that goes wrong, all the servers that have been out of date for years that no one knows about and all these things. But when you come from the outside, you have like more of a picture perfect view of every company, just because you have this kind of one size fits all approach sometimes. No, that makes a lot of sense. So we heard about your journey. You kind of did mix and match of different security kind of skill sets throughout your career. In terms of like, if you think back on the different experience you have had in GRC, especially also that you still work in it as more of a GRC engineering role, what are some of the limits you've seen in your experience? Some of the things where you think to yourself like, why do we do this like this? Or, like it could be more useful for security if you did it this way, etc. Like some of your pet peeves in GRC.
I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for this, but Excel spreadsheets annoy me to no end. No, no, that's
You're not
just
an Excel master, no VLOOKUPs, you don't like any of this?
I learned VLOOKUP from my consulting days, and then I've never
Oh,
used it after. So I've been fortunate to not do that. But no, that was just that's a joke. I think some of the pet peeves are we in GRC, right? We're still holding on to, I think, some of the more I don't want to call it archaic, but some of the methods that, have we always say, oh, it's worked in the past, so
mm,
let's keep going with it. We're we're sort of leaving ourselves behind when I think the world around us is progressively moving towards an automation engineering system design thinking, that kind of approach, right? And we're still stuck with oh, we have to meet the control word to word, a letter by letter, whereas we're not understanding how our environment's structured, right? It's something that I've seen consistently pop up when we do external audits, or I speak to other people that are in the space that's outside of our industry world. So it's that's my biggest pet peeve. And the second pet peeve is like not allowing for error really in complying with a particular control, or that to me is always annoying because I always try to find a balance to say, okay, maybe we don't have this. All right, let's look at how we can get this, but get to this. But in the meantime, let's figure something out that's not going to cause us a big problem, right? That's
mm,
achievable and that's feasible. So I'm big on that personally, and I don't want to push our developers and product managers to do something that would break productivity. Because
yeah.
ultimately, them making money is great for everybody else working at the company. So yeah,
Yeah, no, that's a great way of viewing it. I think it's like the role they have is like we create so much additional toil, and like so much context switches, etc. And I
yeah,
think often like, because we have the truth, right? Because we have like compliance, right? So because we have the truth, like we don't sometimes understand that people come from a totally different mindset. They probably don't care about security, probably don't care about any of this. And I think like sometimes bridging the gap, and I really like what you said about like you can like not comply in the short term sometimes because like it probably not feasible in this current context, and maybe it needs some like re-architecturing, maybe like spinning up a brand new environment for this purpose, etc.
yeah,
Like understanding that it's a work in progress instead of shaming because right now we don't have it. and then you don't make a lot of friends, which makes your job even more difficult the next time around.
Way harder. Way harder. Yeah.
No, that's very true. So if I wanted to know from your experience, if you could like spin out a definition of what would be GRC engineering, how would you define it?
I was thinking about this quite a bit over the last month or so.
Mm-hmm.
And considering how new it is, and it's
Yeah.
always evolving, right? When I first took the opportunity that I'm in currently, it was greenfield. We were able to define it to be whatever it needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you want this to be, a position or a role or a career path that purely helps GRC teams to operationalize and automate all of the boring stuff that we do consistently. That's one path. The other path is how do we weave compliance into actual product design and security architecture? That's another path you can take. Or, heck, you just want to build your own GRC platform internally. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's
Yeah.
that's another path you can take, right? Um, so a true definition is so hard to nail down personally. I know it's a non-answer and sounds like a consulting answer. It depends. So it's really what we want it to be. And I think as a GRC engineer, you kind of encapsulate all three.
Mm.
Um, and that's a skill set that's so particular now and very much in demand, I think, in
Yeah.
our industry.
Yeah. You're right. You're right. And I think like you can always like take it from different lenses, right? I think some people they see just engineering from the lens of like creating less toil for engineering as a department. So they take the lens of like control owners, right? But then some other people they take the lens of the GRC staff and like making
Yeah.
their job more effective. But often like they kind of work together, right? Because by
Yeah.
making the job more effective, you also create less toil. So it depends who you need to kind of convince. Or because like I think often when you speak about toil, for the engineering teams and all the different control owners, like people in the GRC teams, they don't feel like
hmm
as as involved because they say like what's in it for me, like it's not actually helping me, quote unquote. Like it may make my relationship a bit better, but like at the face of it, like it's they take a lot more advantage out of it. So I think it's good to like find different ways to market it to the different audiences so everyone feels like welcome.
Yeah, exactly. Some of the closest relationships that I've built in, security teams have been with the security engineering, security architecture teams that,
Mm-hmm.
do design reviews when products are first bought out and, you have all the fun diagrams and
Yeah.
what the product's scoped for and all that fun stuff. We've personally sort of invested in those relationships so that, we can weave our spin on it or our requirements into design phase itself so that we can then review the product from end to end and be
Mm-hmm.
like, yep, we don't have, well, we may not have, I should never be absolute, we may not have any holes in this product, and we know whether we need to go, I don't know, for high trust certification
Yeah.
or ISO, whatever, right? You're ready.
Yeah.
And it's something that we've really put a lot of work into. And then the other piece of it really is translating our requirements into engineer speak. And this is where I think it's so invaluable to have that engineering experience, right? You know how long it's going to take in a particular sprint. You know what it means to turn on, that level of encryption that's going to
Mm-hmm.
be problematic for reads and writes, right? That's of such a valuable add to our engineering team, and it helps them ship these products faster with that with our requirements in place too.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. I think this issue of translation, I think is like very critical. And I think also like, sometimes teams in security, but outside of like GRC, let's say AppSec or InfoSec, sometimes they don't feel like we're part of the team, right? Often you have
Yeah,
like GRC and every single other security team.
yeah,
Uh,
I think one of your, oh, sorry, I think one of your other guests mentioned, right? Like they've all got on the train and left, and we're
Yeah,
still waiting
exactly. At
here.
the bus stop.
So
Yeah,
at the
exactly.
bus stop.
So,
So
so that
that's kind of how you feel.
exactly, because I think like sometimes, like let's say uh the security team as a whole, like they want like more scanning in the CI pipeline, right?
Yeah.
Or they want additional controls around endpoints. Like they would need the GRC help, especially risk team and compliance team. They would need a lot of their help in terms of like using their weight, right? Using like the way they risk score all of these different potential scenarios, or potentially like some of the regulatory requirements around these controls. And I think often once we get through the certification, we create another cycle for the next
Yeah.
year, and we don't think about how our weight could be used like very effectively to kind of sometimes sway some other directors that might be more adverse to those changes that would make the company as a whole secure, but at the face of it are not directly one to like ISO or
Yeah.
to like the current risk register or something. And I think like GRC Engineering also has that bridge because it's like a team of translators as well. It's a team of like engineers that know GRC, which is literally like the combination of those two skill set that, you know, allow you to translate into both languages.
Yeah. And I think us GRC professionals, really understand value to the business as it comes to a lot of our certifications, right? And how that sells much easier to a customer.
Mm-hmm.
You've done, I don't know, a billion customer questionnaires, I think. So
More or less,
more or
almost a
less,
billion.
almost. So you know how much, how valuable a particular report can be, right? That
Yeah.
answers a lot of their questions. What I find on the flip side is that sometimes engineering may not understand that value. Um,
Yeah.
and I say may because it's not all of them, right? So that part is important too. So we need to sell the aspect of, hey, if we do this, this means X to the business, and that's more valuable for us in the long run.
Yeah.
And that's an important skill set to have too. And I think that's where consulting really prepares you because you're always talking to
Mm.
execs and you're talking to people that are in the room. So
But
that's helpful.
the question is, do you use slides when you speak with them?
I try not to. I really try not to. Sometimes it's inevitable, but but that's the fastest way to lose an engineering person's interest is to have slides.
Yeah, I agree. Tried it and it didn't work. So yeah,
Yeah.
I completely agree. So in terms of GRC engineering, if we get one kind of little bit deeper, what would you say is like some of the issues that are solved when you take this more engineering approach to the way you run your program?
Yeah, I think a couple of things straight off the bat. One is, we've built or we're trying to build an automated evidence data lake and collection aspect of it, right? Where our certification teams, in case they have an audit, just go click a button, everything's available.
Mm,
That pulls in from different systems into our GRC platform. So creating sort of a one-stop shop, operationalizing, right? Like we talked about, that's the operational aspect of it for our internal GRC teams. The second aspect is, like I mentioned previously, is really, getting our requirements into products before they're in beta or
yeah.
before they're in staging. Um, that has, us having that seat at the table really has helped, explore more certifications or, more attestations that we need to get to sell to, I don't know, a particular geographical country. And you and I both know that requirements don't change, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Not all the time, at least. There's
Yeah.
there's a lot of similarities, just worded differently. So, a lot of those requirements have been distilled into core requirements for GRC, and we shift. I'm going to use another buzzword. I'm going to shift left. Say that we shifted
Yeah.
left, and really allow the product managers to own that process and start implementing this into their workflows. So those are two big things. And the second thing is, sorry, the third thing that we've done really is now, working on using data to continuously improve our GRC engineering program. You mentioned control owners, right? Say if we're doing a self-assessment for control owners to say, hey, can you tell me that you still own this control? Yes or
Mm-hmm.
no? Before it was emails, and now we've ported it over to chat and then click a button, and you can
Mm,
start getting more efficiency and more responses that way. So, that's just a few examples, but I think we've helped in operationalizing things, and we've also helped in sort of having that seat at the table, so that our voice is heard.
mhm. No, very very interesting. Yeah, you make great points in terms of the product thing, right? You said about being there from the beginning, shifting left. Like, do you have some tips? Because I think often like um security as a whole, it's a bit challenging sometimes to have that roadmap of what you're going to do, just because sometimes it's reactive driven, right? It's driven by things from the
Yes,
outside. It's a bit easier in GRC just because you have audit cycles and when you present to the board and risk audit committees, etc. But like sometimes it's tough because you get to good relationship with product, right? But then they already have their roadmap set up because then it defines
exactly.
also the workload of all the engineers and
Yep.
potentially the data team that works with them and the design team, etc. So how can you make sure, like, what do you have some tips in terms of building that relationship so you make sure some of the non-functional requirements around security they get like taken into account?
Yeah, I I think that for me, what has worked, right, and it may not be the same for everybody, but really understanding how they work is very important. How the engineering teams work is very important. How the other teams that are dependent on engineering, data team, I don't know, your build and release teams, your infrastructure
Mhm.
teams, understand how they fit into the puzzle. Understand your current status as to where GRC fits in the puzzle, understand where security engineering, architecture, design reviews, all of that fits in the puzzle. That's step one. I've seen way too many GRC professionals not understanding that landscape, coming in and being like, oh, we should do this now. Well, we need to be PCI compliant, but the product's already shipped out. So good luck
Yeah.
with that, right? That's a multi-year, multi-quarter effort. So, it's really understanding how they work and then factoring out your planned audit cycles into their stream of work too. And this is where I think a relationship with engineering leadership comes into play. If you have an audit cycle that runs from throwing it out there, September to December, make sure that you have your control owners, you have all the people that you need to gather evidence from lined up and have them plan this into their work.
Mhm.
And this is more if you manage up to into your management to have them talk to other leadership to have this planned work. When I was doing engineering, nothing made me more annoyed, or that nothing irritated me more than unplanned ad hoc work that was
Yeah.
always priority zero, right? And that's what engineers will tell you. Please go talk to my manager, or
Yeah.
I haven't scoped in this. This is not going to work out for me. To avoid that, and that's how you burn bridges, right?
Yeah.
You don't
Absolutely.
really like each other after that. So having that as part of your I'm going to say sprints because that's what I've been exposed to, having that part of your sprint cycle and planned out for the year and planned out for the next few quarters, um, is a big step to getting there.
Mhm.
Um, the other thing is remove ambiguity. It's going to be hard to do, especially in GRC and security. Removing
Mhm.
ambiguity is like the toughest thing to do, but we have defined ways of meeting a particular control or certification, right? We have those. Let's start translating them into actual requirements with the tools we have in place, with the evidence we're looking for, and possibly links to previous evidence. That's something that I would also recommend doing. It's helped immensely in the past to where an engineer's gone like, well, I don't remember sending this to you last year. Let me click on this. And it's like, oh, okay, this is a screenshot of, our CI/CD configuration. Let's do that.
Mhm.
That's two big steps that I think will propel um, this forward. So
Okay. No, that's very good. I think what you said about like kind of understanding the context and how it's how it works. I think like something that I see sometimes be a challenge, and I'm interested to know what you think of this. Is you talked about the design of the controls and what you get out of it. Like how because often like people in GRC, they're not used to like writing requirements that will be then into get into engineering work. And they might have an idea of what they want, but then when they try to say it in something that made sense to a software engineer, sometimes
Yeah.
it can be a bit complex because it's a skill you need to learn. And if the engineer doesn't have the context, then it becomes very challenging to have that conversation. Like, are there ways through which you also were able to kind of get the right context in front of the GRC people, and then like train the engineers so they can understand these requirements and make it into something that will be software?
Yeah, for anybody who's a GRC professional that's not, worked in an engineering capacity or not been part of those conversations, I've been so fortunate at the places that I've been at to have shadowing programs and sort of,
Mm,
programs that allow you to sit in and listen to how stand up is done, right? Or how design reviews work. And you're in those meetings, you're consistently listening, you're understanding the thought process of the person asking questions and then the engineering team replying. And you're like, okay, so this is how I can make this really vague, ambiguous requirement more sensible for our engineering folks. And then you start to break that down into, okay, what do we have, what we don't have, what do we need from you? Um, and that's been so invaluable.
mhm,
Just being silent, being on mute, just listening to conversations as they happen. It's something that I would encourage anybody, if you're thinking about this program and you have a fresh new GRC engineer or a new GRC professional, sit in on every department of the business if you can.
mhm.
In one of my previous jobs, I got to sit in with some of our service folks that would interact with customers, and it gave me a new perspective and a lot of empathy for for what they do. It's such an invaluable part of growing yourself and growing, your skills as a GRC professional.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I think the shadowing thing is critical because it gives you that context that you lack. And often you might think it's extremely complex, but sometimes once you sit on some of these things, you're like, it's not too bad. Like I get it more or less. And then you can refine your understanding as you do it, right? As you try to like flesh out some of those requirements to the engineers, and so it makes sense for them, etc. Because like I say this as well because like I know some people might build the first steps of their program without having a GRC engineer proper, but maybe having some engineering resources given to them at some point. Um, so sometimes like because someone as a GRC engineer, they also have that GRC context. So most of the time, even if it's very vague, they will
Yeah,
make sense of it because they know what you're thinking about. Which is a luxury, but at the same time makes work a lot more like a lot faster, and also like a lot more to the point. Like there's less issue with like building something that no one needs just because you know exactly what you need because you did it as well.
exactly. Yeah,
You felt the pain.
yeah. A lot of pain, but
Yes.
it's getting better.
Exactly. On the same point, I had a question for you about like, so I was speaking to someone was telling me like a potential drawback because I was thinking like it might be some limits also to this approach. A potential drawback was like when you identify deficiencies, right? And you have like automated ways to know if a control is not operating. So you kind of have that visibility. Sometimes the control owners they can tell you like you have engineering staff in house, fix it. Before you could come to us, right? But now you have engineers in the house, like why not fix it? And I'm thinking like the lines, different line, first line, second line, this kind of independence. But at the same time I'm like, from their perspective, like you have the context, you have the resource, you have the technical ability, like why would I have to put it in my potentially in my backlog to work on it? Like what would you answer to this, and is it something you thought about?
What a great question. And I have never thought about it, but it's something that's very tricky. And I wish no one, and I hope no one comes and tells me that because
I'll put
it'll be
this
hard
podcast
to,
in private, no one will know.
yeah, no one will know. Um, No, it's definitely a fair, valid question. Um, I think if you have that autonomy, it's very easy to over-engineer things too, in my opinion. So
Mhm.
it's a balance that you have to strike. Um, Look, you have the context, you have the autonomy, that's great, but no one's going to know the system as intimately as someone who
Yeah.
designed and worked on it.
Yeah.
Um, you can, unless like you're actively contributing to
Mhm.
production code, which I hope no GRC engineer actually does, um, because that would break a lot of SOD requirements. Um, it's just something that I would leave to the person that knows the system intimately, right? What would rely on from them is to tell me why this won't work, because if there are any nuances to it, and having just written uh, code and deployed things into production and knowing how some of the things that we put out there might have been like patchwork, and you don't really tell other people. That happens a lot. You'd be surprised. It's always something that I would tell them, look, you know this way better than I do. I may have context, I know how this works in theory, but I've never contributed to it.
Yeah.
So that's my answer in air quotes
No,
as to this question.
it's
But
a
yeah,
very good answer. I think it's a very good answer. Just because that additional context is probably the difference between like knowing what you're doing and like massive availability issues in terms of like bringing down a lot of stuff. I think especially when you work like Zoom is a pretty big company. Like lots of these companies where especially the SaaS based, the
yeah,
infrastructure can be extremely complex. Um, and even in the infra team, like sometimes different teams, they don't know what the other team is working on because it could be multi-cloud, could be like a lot of microservices. So I think when you get into this territory of like you could fix it, I think then it as you said, like it could be a very big kind of simplification of how it looks in practice. Like there's
yeah,
no way for me to gather all that context, know the right decision, could be someone from infra here, someone else from the backend engineering team here. Like, yeah, I would have to be an expert at everything, which
exactly.
kind of does not exist. So I really, yeah, it's a difficult question, but I think the way you answered it is I think the way I would answer it, I think it's like the context is a lot more valuable than what people think. Like if you think about it, sometimes like in some big like FANG companies, like when they onboard a backend engineer, sometimes they don't push anything to production for 6 months just because
Yep,
it takes that much time to learn all the developer tools, the specific environment. And if you think about it, like in a similar company, someone that doesn't know your system but can code, like it's not enough to to push
it's
things
really
to
not.
production.
Really, really not. I think being very wary of that, and this is a time where I will say push back.
Yeah,
So
yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely, I agree. I agree. In terms of GRC engineering, there's a question I like to ask as well. So you manage a program. I wanted to know if you ever thought about the build versus buy question. Because of course there's a massive now kind of compliance automation space. Companies are working on this vertical. And sometimes you think like, having someone in house, it helps a lot, but it costs a lot. Software could do it for you, but software might not be as flexible if you have a very complex environment. So, what's your take on this, and how do you navigate this kind of discussion?
yeah. I won't name tools as
No, of
much as I'd
course.
like to, but I think it's getting better in terms of sort of commercial off-the-shelf tools that are out there. I think a few of them have started to really push the needle here on this space, and starting to deliver a lot more value than previous GRC tooling. I think is very myopic in the way they implemented things. Now having customizability really helps, but when you're in a complex environment, it's like you said, right? Just extremely hard to tailor something to what you need. Um, we're the build versus buy question is something I've dealt with forever, and my thought process is always, okay, what do we have currently? How does it work? And whether or not I can bend it to make it work the way I want to.
Mm-hmm.
Previous GRC tools and still some in the market didn't always do that for you.
Mm-hmm.
but there's new tooling out there that I think will allow you for more customizability, right? With the dawn of, GRC engineering and being able to work with APIs and large
Yeah.
swaths of data, I think we've got to the point where we can start using existing tooling to do that. Um, so that's always my thought process first is, okay, what if we bought what works? Let's try to use that. Understand what it can't do, because most of the time that's the longer list because you want it to be so customizable, right? You have people that are around you, execs included, coming to you and like, well, that's great, but I want all of this.
Yeah.
We like using the word in the security industry, single pane of glass, and sometimes that's the most common one that I hear. I'd like this tool to be a single pane of glass for everything. And I'm like, well, that just doesn't happen.
Of
So in
course.
that instance, you have to start stitching things together and building something of your own. So it's a balance.
Mm,
And I think when you're leading or managing a program, it's that context and understanding that's going to help your program be successful.
yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Engineers want to do engineer things and just want to code.
Mhm.
So that answer will always be build. Uh, but but when you've done this for a minute, you know the pitfalls of doing the build part of it. So you want to balance it out.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And I think I think you nailed it. I think there is always this thing where like it solves some problem pretty well, but I think often like it's tailored more to smaller corporations. I think when you have a very simple environment, like we can say, like if you have AWS, GitHub, Jira, Slack, like something that is relatively simple, just because to look to like kind of launch a startup, this is kind of the all the different tools you use to make sure you have enough support, there's enough backing, and those tools, they're built for lasting at least a couple of years up until your IPO at least.
Yeah,
You can like bet on them. So then if you automate the controls related to them, then it makes sense because you can target a wide like kind of demographic in terms of companies. But
yeah,
when you get into like not Fang, but like even like Fortune 500, I'm pretty sure like even like companies in retail or in these spaces, like they probably have very complex environments, like lot. And also what I'm thinking is like a lot of companies also probably don't have a lot of public cloud. Like they probably have hybrid models of
hmm
private cloud they host themselves with very specific environments where it's like tribal knowledge. You have to know it. You have to be in this context to know how it works. They might have specific languages to query, like databases internally. Um, so I think very quickly, like even if it's very painful, like I think the build process will be painful in this process in this context, but like the
yeah,
the reward is big as well, just because it's
yeah.
perfectly fit for this.
No, that's a great point. I would love to build things, but context is king, like you said.
Yeah.
So it's important to know where that balance really lies.
Mm, absolutely. In terms of like perspective, right? If we think about the future, it's still a very, very like new industry. You're one of the trailblazers that actually have a program named like this. So it's still very, very new, and there's only like about a handful of companies that have like a program around this. What would you say is like the next steps? What would you say is some of the things we don't see right now, but like potentially in the future would make a massive difference to the industry?
You know, I would like, and this is a non-technical answer, so this is more of a cultural thing. Some of the feedback I've gotten, right, and just talking to various GRC professionals, it's like, oh, will an auditor accept this evidence that you've
Mm,
generated with your integrations? And you're like, well, I've done the work to make sure it's acceptable. It's got the timestamps. It's got the fact that it was system generated. It's got the evidence that you need. I want us to move from that screenshot model of like, show me the clock and the date and the screenshot, and I want us to take the industry forward and to think, to a more of a thinking of, okay, automated evidence is acceptable, because it hits all of our controls, it meets what we need. Um, and understanding, the more we socialize this, I think the more people are going to start accepting it, and that for me is the biggest push that we need to have in the next few years is changing that mindset of hey, control owner, take a screenshot of this, and it's an annoying thing to take screenshots. I personally don't like it. So it's that model that I'd like to move forward. And number two is sort of really defining what as a field of GRC engineering, what tools, technologies would we like really use, right? Because we've used tools and technologies that do some things and not all of the things like we talked about. I'm really hoping that tooling it will start to evolve and be like a more mature version of themselves because some of them are actually doing the two thing and doing that thing. So uh, it's something I'm looking forward to, but that's not the be all and end all. I think that this is a more philosophical answer. I think that it's starting to be more accepted in the field of security in general that, oh yeah, you know what? GRC has this engineering partner that we can now talk to. Compliance is not an activity that needs to be shunned anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's now
Absolutely.
a discussion, and that's my massive takeaway from working with very security engineers and great security partners. So.
Mm-hmm. That's two very good points. On your first point, what would you say is like, do you think the change will come from the industry first or from the auditors? Because I think like often I know some of the players, they kind of build some relationship with auditors. But it's always, it's auditing is, massive industry. It's been this case, we
Yeah.
all know Enron, etc. But it's been a decades, almost a century industry. In terms of like, because we can each individually, when we go through audits, like kind of educate our auditors around like this is as valuable. um but it's always two-pronged, right? Like the GRC engineer might produce this, but then the compliance team has to understand that it's as valuable and then has to sell it to the auditors. So
Yeah.
there's like you need to win two parties as well, because sometimes the compliance team might say, I don't know if it's as like as secure or as like strong of an evidence compared, because like we can see the timestamps very clearly on the screenshot. And I don't know if metadata is similar, but I don't know. Can't see as well.
Yeah.
So, like, where would you say the change will come from first?
I think it's definitely going to be internal.
Hmm.
Us, I think we have a responsibility in this space as sort of leaders in this space to continue to socialize our mission and our vision. And this is something that, I'll bring up now is that for any GRC engineering team, set a team charter. Know
Mm.
what your mission is, know what your vision is, know how you're going to achieve it, know how much value you're going to provide to the business, and really stick to those principles. Team charters can go wrong in so many ways, but it's important, I think, to really get everyone on the same page, and then using that to socialize what you do and how valuable you are to your compliance team, to your risk team, to your engineering product teams, right? That is going to be a natural way to push auditors to, understand, okay, this makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, More socializing, more education that we do, I think we'll start to move this program a lot faster, a lot more forward.
I agree. I agree. I think at some point, like, if it's widespread enough and like from the industry, everyone's picking it up and starting to build their own programs. Like, if you educate every single auditor out there, at some point, the vision will change. At least, there'll be less like doubt around this type of evidence, and there'll be more like understand how trustworthy it can be. So yeah, I think it's easier to change it that way, just because you can own the process, so you can, and it
Yeah,
makes it easier for you anyway. So then it's more about like persuasion, or at least like selling skills, which are always important.
yeah. Once again, in the beginning, I did say I was disillusioned with the consulting life, but the skills that it gave me were so invaluable. So
I
yeah,
agree.
yeah,
I agree.
that's my 2 cents. Get into consulting if this is your first career opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. Some good skills there. In terms of skills, I wanted to know like if you could pinpoint a couple, one, two, like a couple of skills that you think someone that would want to work in GRC engineering would need, what would they be?
definitely working with code for sure.
Hmm.
That's, I think a big skill. Understanding data and some data engineering expertise would be fantastic.
Hmm.
Because what I'm starting to see is that you get all these amazing people that can build scripts and write code very easily, but working with data that's not uniform, that's copious, that's so impossible to trim down is harder.
Yeah.
So I like data engineering a lot because that helps me really focus on what I need to focus on, and I think
Hmm.
an invaluable skill. Um, and then once again, sticking to more of the technical stuff, really design, understanding system design and how system design thinking works. There are some great GitHub repos. Sorry, I know you've got allegiances, but I've found some great GitHub repos that have helped me sort of understand um, system design, and it's something that I take very seriously
Hmm.
because that allows you to further have a say in those product discussions as well. So those are my three main skills, but on the sort of the GRC side, really understanding how to break down a requirement and a control to bare bones, right? Okay, what tool do we have to achieve this? What do we have currently in place? Okay, do we meet it 100%?
Hmm.
90/50? How do I meet, you know, meet it 100%? How do I meet it to that 50% if we don't have it? Compensating controls, what are they?
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are things that I really look for in GRC engineer, because and then it's aptitude, right? So it's I think a lot of skills can be learned, but that sort of thinking is big for me.
Yeah, yeah. I like the fact that you kind of pinpoint data. I think data sometimes is kind of understated because I think like when you get GRC data from your GRC tool, and it's a mess, but at the end of it, like a lot of GRC engineering boils down to like communicating with APIs and getting that data and making sense of it, and then like using it to like for good output, right? Like finding a way to like transform it into something that is actionable in the context of GRC, which is all data.
Yeah,
So I think sometimes when we think about engineering, think about scripting, as you said as well, right? Like this skill of like I can do Python scripts, I can build small programs, but I think like it's only part of the answer because I think like as you said, like communicating with API, this kind of more data skills, like this all like pandas and all these different
yeah,
libraries. I think they're valuable in the sense that GRC also produces enormous amounts of data. And I think making sense of this by itself is already like a massive improvement compared to where your program was before.
yeah. Make friends with your data science team.
Yeah, yeah,
They will be
exactly.
invaluable as you do this.
Your best friends.
Yeah.
The last question I have for you, which is a question I ask all of my guests, is if you had a magic wand just for today, um, it's a 1 day thing, and you could solve one thing in GRC forever. Wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. What would it be?
Treating us as the little brother. Sorry to all the younger kids in the room, but it's something that I've struggled with, throughout my career. Is sometimes you're not valuable enough, and it took
Mm,
a lot for us to work to get there, right? To be valuable now. But sometimes, okay, that's a compliance person. There, you don't know what we're talking about. Is that something that I would eliminate from every single company, because that sort of thinking is just detrimental to the business in general, and you start to have these strained relationships. My theme here is building relationships with
yeah.
with other teams, and that's been something I've encountered far too much in my career, and I would love to eliminate that. So it's not a technical thing, it's not a
Yeah.
tooling thing, it's very much a cultural thing for me.
No, I like it. Would you say it's like can't take like it's not easy answer, but whose fault do you think it is?
I, I think there's blame on both sides, to be honest.
Okay.
You know, I think as compliance teams, we come and wave the stick, a pretty large stick, and we come and say, "Oh, if you don't do this, we're going to get breached and we're
Yeah,
going to get fined." And in some cases, yes, in other cases, in a lot of cases, not really. And we don't really try to work with those teams. And people that work on those teams then have resentment, and that resentment just carries over.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a 70-30 blame ratio to go around. I think,
Nice ratio.
yeah, heavily weighted towards us GRC.
No, that's a great point. There's definitely something I agree with, and I also encountered, and I definitely agree that it would make relationships a lot easier. But also agree, blame is
Yeah,
a little bit both sides.
yeah, there's both sides.
Amazing. Actually, it was amazing having you on. We had a great chat. I think there was a lot of things that people would get out of it, especially from like your experience as a practitioner, and also the fact that you had like you wore a couple of different hats throughout your career. So, and we could feel it in your answers as well. So I really think people would kind of enjoy this more complex and more like complete approach, which definitely will help people build their programs or at least like understand a bit more like what it takes to work in this field.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you giving me the platform and the opportunity to talk about some of the stuff that we're doing. It's still not to the point where we would want it to be, and it's continuously evolving. But I think some of the folks that have been talking to you more recently have really brought to light like where this position in this role in this industry is heading to, and I'm very excited for the future. So I'm glad to be a part of it.
Me too. Me too. Have a good day. Take care.
All right, you too.